Hey you guys, welcome back to Flickers of Fear. Got the title of the show right this time, as I usually don't. So let's talk a little bit about Alex Garland, the writer director. Now, as any of you that have been around for a while, know he had a movie that came out very recently called Civil War, and Tom and I went to the theater to see it and did a live stream review of it, which is on this channel somewhere, so you can find that if you want. So I was kind of thinking about Alex Garland and about some of his other films. If you didn't know, he also made Ex Machina from 2014. I believe that was his first movie, the first one he directed anyway. And he also made the excellent Annihilation in 2018. And prior to that, he had written a lot of screenplays, probably the best of which being the Danny Boyle film 28 Days Later. So I was kind of thinking about his work in the past. And then as I was kind of ruminating about that, I remembered seeing a trailer back in 2022 for his movie Men while I was in the theater seeing another horror movie, which I can't really remember what it was at the moment. Now, at the time, the trailer for the movie looked really weird and really interesting, and it kind of seemed like it would be right up my alley. So I kind of made a mental note to, I'm going to have to check that out when it comes out. But I admit, I guess I kind of forgot about it. And then I guess when it was released, I didn't really notice much stir like in the horror community about it. So it sort of, retreated back into the dusty back corners of my brain someplace. But then, like, more recently in the past couple months, I started seeing people discussing Men again, like, in light of Civil War coming out, because that was the movie that he had made before Civil War. So the weird thing is the consensus seemed to be that Men hadn't been very good, at least according to a lot of random opinions that I read, like in various places. But I did notice this past weekend that it was streaming on Max, and I was kind of in the mood for it, so I decided I was going to give it a shot, especially after I saw a comment on a horror forum, I think it was on Facebook or somewhere, that it was one of the weirdest movies that the commenter had ever seen, so I was just like, well, that definitely sounds like something I need to see then. So Man was released by A24, and it's usually described as a folk horror film, and this is a classification that I don't have any particular beef with. It seems pretty accurate. It's kind of one of those ambiguous movies that's full of like a lot of symbolism, and it could be read in several different ways, I guess. So if you like kind of more straightforward story with everything sort of spelled out, or something that's just simple, you will probably not dig Men too much. Even though, I mean, it's very eerie, but it's relatively easy to follow. I found it very easy to follow. It's not like convoluted or anything, and the ending goes like full on bonkers body horror. So I suspect that a lot of people might have a what the fuck did I just watch kind of reaction to it, if they're not maybe on the metaphorical wavelength that the movie seems to be going for. They're like, what the fuck did that even mean? You know what I mean? I can see a lot of people having that reaction. Now, the thing about it, though, is I liked it quite a lot, like much more than I was expecting that I would like it, but it's really not for everybody. I mean, no movie is, but, some movies are more not for everybody than others, and this is one of those. So I kind of hesitate to recommend it to just any rando whose preferences I'm not familiar with. So take from that what you will. So there's a fantastic sequence at the beginning which just pulls you right into the story, or at least it pulled me right into the story. We're introduced to our main character, whose name is Harper Marlowe, and she's actually played by Jessie Buckley, who I immediately recognized from the Charlie Kaufman adaptation of the Ian Reid novel I'm Thinking of Ending Things. So she's staring out the window of her high-rise apartment, and she has like blood trickling down from her nose. And then, very like silently, a man falls in slow motion like past the window, and he's like staring in at her like as he's plummeting to his death. So this whole setup is awesome. I loved it. Gets elaborated on later as you find out like who the falling man was and what the situation was that led up to this whole incident. So we then cut to Harper arriving at a country house out in the village of Cotson in Herefordshire, England. I'm not really sure if it's a real village or not, but that's what it's called in the movie. She's actually rented this cottage for 2 weeks. I assume it's like an Airbnb or something like that. We discern from flashbacks and conversations that she has been recently widowed and has come out here kind of for some time alone. She's, kind of working remotely and stuff like that. But she's trying to process her grief away from home and away from the city where her husband died. So showing her around this absolutely gorgeous house, actually, is a dude named Jeffrey, who's played by Rory Kinnear. And he's the owner of the property, and he's kind of like the epitome of just this affable, slightly eccentric English country dude, you know what I mean? He's like exactly like that. He's kind of awkward and kind of goofy, and he sometimes like lingers or like stares a little bit too long. Like I said, he's kind of like awkward, it seems, but he doesn't seem particularly threatening. And after the tour, he pretty much like leaves her to her own devices. Now, at first, everything is just completely idyllic. Like, the house and the gardens are just gorgeous, and everything is really peaceful and really serene, and she thinks it's going to just be this wonderful 2 weeks. However, she does have these frequent and rather intrusive memories of her husband's death. So it turns out, as you may have surmised, that the man falling past the window at the beginning of the movie was obviously her former spouse, whose name was James. And later on in the story, we see a full flashback where Harper is very calmly telling James that she is divorcing him. James, however, is, let's put it this way, not having it, and he flips the fuck out and threatens to unalive himself if she leaves him. And there's a big confrontation, and he ends up hitting her in the face, like hence the bloody nose that you saw at the beginning. So Harper, of course, is shocked and furious by this development, and she locks him out of the apartment, at which point he forces his way into the apartment upstairs, the one above theirs, and I guess like attempts to climb down back into his own flat, like through the balcony, but he either slips or allows himself to fall, like to his really grisly death below, which, yes, they do show the aftermath of. So, despite all this, Harper is trying to kind of put the past behind her and enjoy her time away in this beautiful setting. And she has a friend that she communicates to via FaceTime. Her name is Riley, who I'm assuming is like her best friend. And the day after Harper gets to the house, she decides she's going to take a walk through the nearby woods. And it's just bucolic and beautiful, and she's just delighted. You can just tell, like, by her facial expressions, just like magical, you know. Now she comes across this old railway tunnel, and she kind of, like, it's abandoned, and she kind of spends some time in there, like, listening to echoes of her own voice. Like, and it's interesting because the way that her voice echoes back to her, like, that's used as kind of like an auditory, like a musical cue, like throughout the movie. And I thought that was really well done because it's kind of spooky. Like, I was kind of into it. But while she's doing that, she sees this shadowed figure, like a dude, at the other end of the tunnel. And he suddenly, like, starts come running toward her. Like, she can't see who it is because it's, like, shadowed. But he comes running toward her. So, understandably, she freaks the hell out and, like, runs off in the other direction, as you would. Now, after she thinks that she's escaped danger, she's walking through this big open field, and then she sees a disturbingly naked man just standing in front of what I believe is like an abandoned house or something like that, and he's staring very intently at her. Now, this naked man actually appears in her garden later on and tries to get into her house. Now, Harper calls the cops, again, as you would, and the man does get arrested and hauled away. Although it turns out, she finds out later on, that he was released later on that same evening since he didn't really do anything serious. Like, he didn't get into the house, and he's probably just crazy, and don't worry about it. You know, it's that kind of thing. So as the story unfolds, Harper meets more of the men in this village, who are all played by the same actor, Rory Kinnear. The way that they do it, it's kind of like, some of it is CG, so it's really like Uncanny Valley, which I think like really adds to like the creepiness factor, but you know what I mean? But some of it is just like different hair and different makeup and stuff like that, like prosthetics and things like that, but it's still pretty clearly always the same dude. So all of these people that she meets, like one of them is like a schoolboy who's probably like the creepiest one because it's a kid's, but like a teenager's body really, but with, you know, the face of like a middle-aged man, but kind of CGI'd to look younger. It's like, it's really disturbing. So this kid basically like calls her a stupid bitch because she won't play hide and seek with him. So that's nice. One of them is a super creepy, like, vicar who actually seems kind of nice and understanding at first, even though he's getting a little too much in your face, and you're like, back off, bud. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. But she's kind of like, she's in a bad place, so she actually opens up to him, and then he essentially, like, ends up blaming her, like, for her husband's death, at which point she's like, you can fuck all the way off, you know what I mean? Like, again, understandably. Now, a couple of the other people are just kind of like regular working blokes, like, that are in the pub. Like, one of them is the bartender in the pub, and one of them is one of the police officers that comes when she calls about the naked man in the garden. I should also note that the little church where the vicar is, like, presiding over has a green man, if you know what that is, like, Google that if you don't know what it is, in a shield and a gig, like, carved into the pulpit. Now, this is not explained in the context of the movie, but if you know what those symbols mean, then that's kind of like a significant detail. Now, from this point in the movie, the narrative gets more nebulous. Like, Harper becomes more and more threatened by these different iterations of Rory Kinnear, essentially. Some of whom, like, appear on her front lawn or outside her door and then just disappear, so you know that there's something maybe not realistic going on, you know what I mean? She also starts to have trouble getting hold of Riley, like, over her phone, like, with her app that she talks to her on, like, sometimes glitching out, and then sometimes you just see, like, little flashes of, like, really weird, like, disturbing kind of faces on it or something like that, while she's talking to Riley, like, trying to tell Riley where she is so Riley can come help her. So yeah, as I mentioned, like, things get kind of more metaphorical, more, like, folk horror focused, like, in the third act, and, like I said, more body horror, and the incidents kind of become more dreamlike and way more disgusting and, like, way more visceral. This is largely a psychological horror film, at least in the first two acts, but it gets pretty gnarly, like, toward the end. So if you're squeamish, then you might want to not watch it. Now, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I will say that the movie leaves it mostly open to interpretation as to how much of what we're seeing happen is real and how much of it is Harper's perception of the situation as filtered through her trauma, like, regarding the death of her husband, Now, the movie also has something like a subtext concerning the way that the different men all blame Harper for their own feelings and their own actions toward her, much like her husband did. And so I guess you could kind of read that as, like, kind of a feminist reading, because it's portraying a kind of general, and later, like, symbolism later on, maybe like a generational misogyny. I personally didn't find this theme particularly heavy-handed at all. Everything said by the different men in the film to her, variations of it have been said to me and to pretty much every other woman I know. So it didn't come off as realistic or trying to get a specific point across or anything like that. But that said, like, I found this message, if that's what you want to call it, I think that was kind of, like, secondary. Like I said, it was almost more like a subtext, because really the whole thing that came across to me was this creepy, nightmarish story that was kind of more centered around how Harper's perception of the world had been tainted, had been colored by her experiences with her emotionally manipulative and, frankly, abusive husband, who, it has to be said, like, the way he died, it seemed particularly calculated by him to burden her with, like, horrible guilt for the rest of her life, like he did on purpose. Even though intellectually she knows that it wasn't her fault, that he was trying to manipulate her emotions, but she still feels guilty nonetheless, as most people would. So she was, in a sense, seeing all the other men in the film, who were all played by the same actor, whether they existed in reality or not, she was seeing them through this kind of fractured lens of her damaged psyche from the relationship that she had had before. So yeah, I found the cinematography here is beautiful. This is a beautiful looking movie. The acting performances are fantastic across the board. I mean, Jessie Buckley is outstanding, but I think, like, Rory Kinnear, like, he crushes it, because it's multiple roles. He's, a lot of different people in this movie, and he comes across as completely different, but then, like, still, like, really scarily similar, like, in each version, or I guess, like, archetype that he's playing. Now, I don't want to lean too far into this because this movie has a lot of differences, but this slightly reminded me, in some ways, of Mother, the Darren Aronofsky film, which I think came out in 2017, which I've reviewed elsewhere on this channel. So if you like that, I feel like this is in the same ballpark. So if you like that, you might like this as well. I don't, maybe not, maybe I'm just completely talking out my ass, but I just got the same kind of vibe from this as I got from Mother. Now, this seems to have gotten decent critical reviews at the time that it came out, but audience reactions to it were and are still like very mixed. So it's definitely not for all tastes. I liked it a great deal. I thought about it a lot after I watched it, and it definitely had some really like creepy, unsettling imagery that kind of stuck with me. So if any of you guys have seen it, I'd be curious to know your opinion on it, like what you thought it meant, like what you thought the symbolism meant. I mean, I have my own theories about it. I don't want to go too much into them because, like I said, that would necessitate spoilers, but I'm open to different interpretations about it if you want to share them. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys again on the next one. Bye.